It was the summer of 2017, in one of Dubai's most luxurious beach resorts. The kind of place where couples came to begin new lives, wrapped in romance and promise. But inside Suite 503, the perfect honeymoon scene was shattered by horror. The bed was unmade. A champagne glass lay shattered on the floor, and in the silence of the early morning hours, the staff would soon stumble upon a sight that no one expected: a young bride, lifeless on the very night she should have been celebrating her new marriage. A honeymoon meant for joy had turned into a nightmare. Behind the polished marble walls and private balconies, a dark story had unfolded, one of love, suspicion, and deadly rage. At the center of this tragedy were two newlyweds. Khalid Al Mansoor, a 28-year-old groom from one of Dubai's most influential families, was raised to protect his name, his status, and above all, his honor. His bride, Maria de la Cruz, just 24, was a Filipina nurse who had come to Dubai chasing opportunity and security, carrying with her memories of a past she thought she had left behind. But secrets have a way of surfacing, even in paradise. Late one night, Khalid picked up his wife's phone and uncovered something he was never meant to see: affectionate messages exchanged with an old lover, Miguel Santos. To Khalid, it wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. And in a culture where family reputation could mean everything, that discovery would spark a deadly chain of events. What happened next inside that honeymoon suite would shock Dubai and leave two families broken. But who were the people behind this tragedy, and what drove a wedding night into a crime scene? Khalid Al Mansoor was born in 1989 into one of Dubai's old, respected business families. His father ran a successful import-export company that had supplied the Emirates for decades, and the Al Mansoor name was synonymous with wealth and tradition. From his earliest years, Khalid was raised with the belief that family honor was everything, a fragile treasure that had to be guarded at all costs. Reputation, loyalty, and appearances weren't just values in his home, they were law. As the eldest son, Khalid grew up under immense pressure to embody strength and dignity. He attended prestigious schools, and his family sent him to London for part of his education. On the surface, Khalid acquired a cosmopolitan polish, fluent in English, versed in global business, and comfortable in Western social circles. Yet beneath that veneer, the cultural expectations of his homeland remained firmly rooted. He absorbed the lesson that a man's worth was tied to control over his household, his wife, and his family's name. Those who knew him described him as ambitious and confident, someone who carried himself with authority even in his 20s. He was handsome, well-spoken, and often charming at social events. But there was another side to Khalid that friends occasionally glimpsed: a flash of temper when he felt disrespected, an edge of jealousy when he suspected betrayal. By 2017, Khalid had reached the age where his family expected him to marry. It was not simply about companionship. It was about respectability, business alliances, and continuing the family legacy. When discussions began about Maria de la Cruz, a young Filipina nurse living in Dubai, Khalid initially saw the match as convenient rather than romantic. His family approved. Maria seemed modest and well-mannered, and above all, she would bring him the image of a responsible married man. Khalid was not a man prone to open displays of affection. For him, marriage was about duty, appearance, and loyalty. He demanded respect and expected obedience. What he could not tolerate, what his pride could never forgive, was the idea of betrayal. His flaw, embedded deep within him, was a jealousy that simmered just beneath the surface. And when provoked, that jealousy could turn into rage. Maria de la Cruz's life began in a very different world. Born in 1993 in Manila, she was raised in a modest Catholic household. Her father drove a taxi, her mother worked as a seamstress, and Maria often helped care for her younger siblings. From a young age, she understood hardship and sacrifice, but she was also known for her determination. Teachers described her as bright and hardworking, a young woman with dreams larger than her circumstances. In her late teens, Maria enrolled in nursing school, a path chosen not only out of passion but also practicality. Nursing was a profession that could take her abroad, offering the chance to support her family back home. During her college years, she fell in love with Miguel Santos, a fellow student. Their relationship was tender but complicated, full of youthful promises that clashed with the economic realities of their lives. When Maria was offered the chance to move to Dubai in 2015, she took it, believing it was her only way to lift her family from poverty. In Dubai, Maria worked tirelessly as a nurse. She was admired by patients and colleagues alike for her kindness and dedication. But life as an expatriate was lonely. While she sent money home, she often missed her family and clung to fragments of her past, including memories of Miguel. They stayed in touch occasionally through messages, nothing more than words on a screen, yet for Maria, those messages were a comfort and a reminder of who she had once been. When Maria was introduced to Khalid, she saw opportunity. A marriage to him promised stability, financial security, and a respected place in Emirati society. For her, the match was a way to finally escape the constant struggle of survival and to ensure her parents and siblings would live more comfortably. But deep down, she wrestled with doubts. She barely knew Khalid. Their courtship was brief, and his controlling nature unsettled her. Still, she silenced her worries, convincing herself that stability mattered more than love. Maria's fatal flaw was her secretiveness. She had never fully let go of her past, nor confessed it to her new husband. To Khalid, she presented herself as the dutiful wife. But in the privacy of her phone, she still carried echoes of Miguel, the affectionate messages, the confessions of longing, the reminders that she had once been loved freely. Maria told herself it was harmless, just words, but she knew Khalid would see it differently. Khalid and Maria came from opposite worlds, one of wealth and tradition, the other of struggle and aspiration. To outsiders, their union in 2017 looked like a fairy tale. The Emirati businessman and the Filipina nurse joined in a glittering wedding that symbolized prosperity and new beginnings. But beneath the polished photographs and carefully staged smiles lay fault lines. For Khalid, marriage was about loyalty and image. For Maria, it was about survival and stability. Their goals were never aligned, and hidden within Maria's phone was the one secret Khalid could never forgive. It was only a matter of time before those worlds collided, and when they did, the consequences would prove deadly. The wedding of Khalid Al Mansoor and Maria de la Cruz in 2017 was nothing short of spectacular. For Khalid's family, it was not simply a marriage but a display of status. The Al Mansoor name carried weight in Dubai, and every detail of the ceremony was designed to reflect wealth, tradition, and honor. Guests arrived at one of the city's most luxurious ballrooms, with crystal chandeliers overhead and golden dacre lining the tables. Classical Arabic music floated through the hall as Emirati dignitaries, extended relatives, and Maria's small circle of expatriate friends took their seats. Khalid entered first, confident and commanding, dressed in a pristine khanjura, his presence instantly noticeable. He was the picture of composure, moving from table to table, shaking hands, exchanging formalities, and accepting congratulations. To many, he looked like the perfect groom, serious, proud, and deeply invested in his role as the head of a new household. Maria, in contrast, was radiant yet visibly nervous. She wore an elegant white gown chosen to blend east and west, modest yet striking, with intricate lace that shimmered under the chandeliers. She smiled for photographs, greeted family, and went through the rituals with grace, but her eyes carried a different story, one of hesitation. For Maria, the night was overwhelming, a collision of dreams and fears. She had longed for stability, yet in that moment she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. Throughout the evening, Khalid's controlling nature appeared in subtle ways. He dictated where she should sit, how long she should greet certain guests, and even corrected her posture during the traditional dances. To outsiders, these might have seemed like small gestures, a groom guiding his new bride. But to Maria, they were reminders that she was stepping into a life where independence might not have space. And then a shadow fell over the celebration. During a pause in the festivities, Maria slipped away to check her phone. In the midst of the endless congratulations, a message notification appeared on her screen from Miguel, her past love back in the Philippines. The words were simple, almost innocent. "I'm happy for you, but I still miss you." Maria froze. In that instant, her heart raced. She quickly cleared the message, hoping no one had noticed, but she could not escape the wave of guilt that followed. Unbeknownst to her, Khalid had already grown suspicious of her guardedness around her phone. While he didn't see the message that night, her fleeting distraction during the wedding did not go unnoticed. Later, he would replay that moment in his mind, convinced it was the first visible crack in the foundation of their marriage. As the ceremony concluded, the couple posed for photographs, framed by luxury and applause. Smiles masked the tension, and no one in the crowd could have guessed that beneath the glittering surface, a storm was already building. For the guests, it was a night of joy. For Khalid and Maria, it was the beginning of a fragile union destined to shatter. After the glittering celebration of their wedding, Khalid and Maria departed for what should have been the happiest days of their new life together, their honeymoon. The Al Mansoor family spared no expense, booking the newlyweds into a luxury beachfront resort in Dubai. Their suite overlooked the Arabian Gulf, the kind of place where every detail whispered of paradise: polished marble floors, private terraces, and rose petals carefully arranged across silk sheets. To the outside world, their honeymoon looked perfect. But behind closed doors, cracks began to show almost immediately. Khalid carried himself with the pride of a man who believed he had fulfilled his duty: a successful marriage, a beautiful wife, and a life that seemed complete. He posted smiling photographs with Maria, hand in hand by the pool, enjoying candlelit dinners and strolling along the beach. These were the images he wanted his family and the world to see. Maria played her part too. She smiled in the photos, dressed elegantly, and appeared to embrace her new life. But inside, she felt uneasy. The man she had married just days earlier was already revealing sides of himself she had feared: controlling, suspicious, and easily angered. Small disagreements about dinner choices, how long she lingered by the pool, or whether she greeted staff appropriately, were magnified by Khalid's temper. Most of all, Khalid noticed her guardedness with her phone. In 2017, WhatsApp was already the lifeline of communication for millions of people in Dubai, and Maria used it frequently. She often kept her phone close, sometimes tilting the screen away when Khalid was near. At first, Khalid dismissed it as habit, perhaps even modesty. But as the days passed, his suspicion deepened. He began to ask questions: who was messaging her, why she smiled faintly at certain notifications, why she quickly locked her phone when he entered the room. Maria, for her part, was caught in a silent conflict. She knew she should sever ties with Miguel, her former love, but she hadn't yet found the strength to let go completely. His messages were not constant, but they lingered like ghosts, affectionate reminders of a life she had once imagined for herself. To Maria, they were harmless words, a secret comfort in a new and intimidating world. To Khalid, had he known, they would have been unforgivable. The breaking point came late one evening. Khalid had returned from a late dinner on the terrace while Maria was inside scrolling through her phone. She thought he was still outside when a message appeared on her screen. It was from Miguel. "I wish you were here instead of there. I'll always love you." Khalid walked in just as she was reading it. At first, silence. He stood motionless, staring at her expression and then at the glowing phone in her hands. Maria panicked, trying to lock the screen, but Khalid was faster. He snatched the phone from her, and in an instant, the carefully constructed image of their marriage shattered. On the screen were weeks of conversations, affectionate words, longing confessions, subtle promises. To Maria, they were only fragments of a past she had not let go of. To Khalid, they were proof of betrayal, humiliation, and dishonor. The atmosphere in the suite changed instantly. The air grew heavy, and Khalid's breathing became sharp, ragged with rage. His pride, the foundation of his identity, had been pierced. Here, on his honeymoon in the city where his family's name carried weight, he believed he had been made a fool. Maria tried to explain. She begged him to understand that the messages meant nothing, that she had chosen this marriage, that her past was behind her. But to Khalid, the words were lies stacked on top of betrayal. His voice rose, echoing off the marble walls. Guests in nearby rooms would later recall hearing shouting, a man's voice thundering with fury, a woman crying, pleading. In that moment, honor, pride, and jealousy collided. What should have been nights of passion and joy became a battlefield of suspicion and rage. The honeymoon suite, once filled with flowers and champagne, now felt like a cage. Maria's secret, the one she had hoped to keep hidden forever, had been exposed. Khalid's worst fear had been confirmed, and with it, the fury inside him began to spiral out of control. The discovery of those messages was not simply the unveiling of a hidden truth. It was the trigger that would set into motion a chain of violence, leading to a tragedy that would stain the Al Mansoor name and forever silence Maria's voice. The honeymoon suite at the Jumeirah resort should have been a sanctuary of love, but on that humid evening in 2017, it was instead filled with rising tension. The discovery of the messages on Maria's phone had shattered any illusion of harmony. Khalid's pride had been pierced, and Maria's worst fear had come true. The secret she had guarded so carefully was now exposed. At first, there was only silence. Khalid stood frozen in the middle of the room, Maria's phone in his hands, his eyes locked on the screen. The words from Miguel stared back at him, intimate, affectionate, undeniable. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her face pale, her lips trembling as she tried to summon words. "Khalid, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not what you think. It was just a mistake, messages, nothing more." But Khalid's silence was heavier than any scream. He stared at her as though he were looking at a stranger, the woman he had just married now transformed into an enemy who had humiliated him on the grandest scale possible. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost calm, the calm before a storm. "You lied to me. From the beginning, you lied." Maria shook her head, tears already streaming down her face. "No, I married you, I chose you. The past, it's behind me." But Khalid didn't hear her words as explanations. He heard them as excuses, as betrayals dressed in softer clothing. His mind was no longer focused on reason, but on honor, the crushing weight of it. The belief that he had been made a fool by his own wife, during his own honeymoon in a city where his family's name was everything. The confrontation escalated quickly. Voices rose, echoing off the polished marble walls of the suite. Maria tried to reach for him, to calm him, but he pulled away violently. He paced the room, shouting accusations, demanding to know how long the affair had gone on, how she could humiliate him in such a way. "It wasn't an affair," Maria sobbed. "It was just words. I swear to you, Khalid, just words. Please believe me." But Khalid was far beyond believing. In his eyes, those words were worse than an affair. They were proof of betrayal, of deception, of a wife who had dared to keep secrets from her husband. His anger built like a storm, his chest heaving, his fists clenching as rage consumed him. Neighbors in nearby suites would later tell investigators that they heard the shouting, a man's voice, booming and violent, and a woman's breaking, pleading, begging. The sounds carried through the corridors of the luxury resort, muffled but unmistakable. Inside the suite, Maria's pleas grew more desperate. She fell to her knees, clutching Khalid's hand, begging him to forgive her, insisting that she loved him and only him. But Khalid pulled away, his fury now uncontrollable. "You disgraced me," he shouted. "You disgraced my family. You think I can live with this shame." Maria tried to run, not to leave the room, but to escape the intensity of his rage, retreating toward the corner of the suite near the balcony doors. But Khalid followed, his anger narrowing his vision until all he saw was betrayal, all he felt was humiliation. And then, in a moment that would end everything, he snapped. He grabbed her by the arms, shaking her violently, demanding more answers she could not give. Maria screamed, struggling to break free, but Khalid's strength overpowered her. In his frenzy, his hands moved from her arms to her throat. At first, it was to silence her, to stop her sobs, but within seconds the pressure grew. His fingers tightened, fueled not by logic but by blind rage. Maria clawed at his wrists, gasping for air, her eyes wide with terror. She tried to plead one last time, but no words escaped, only a choking cry that faded into silence. The struggle lasted minutes, but for Khalid, it felt like mere seconds. His breathing was ragged, his vision clouded by fury. And then suddenly it was over. Maria's body went limp in his hands. Her eyes, once filled with life and fear, stared blankly into nothing. He released her, and she crumpled to the floor of the honeymoon suite, her veil of secrecy silenced forever. The room was quiet now, the only sound Khalid's uneven breathing. He stepped back, staring at what he had done. For a moment, disbelief washed over him. This was not the image he had built for himself, the proud husband, the respectable groom. Instead, he was standing over his bride's lifeless body, the weight of his actions pressing down like a stone. The suite, once decorated with rose petals and champagne glasses, had become a crime scene. The scent of perfume and flowers lingered in the air, mixing grotesquely with the heavy silence of death. Khalid stumbled toward the bed, sitting heavily, his hands trembling. He stared at his palms as though seeing them for the first time, realizing they had taken a life, the life of the woman he had vowed to protect only days before. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Tourists strolled along the beaches, couples dined at seaside restaurants, unaware of the tragedy unfolding behind closed doors. Inside the suite, time seemed to stop. Khalid's mind raced. Should he call for help? Should he confess? Or should he hide what he had done? In the hours that followed, he would make choices that sealed his fate, but nothing could change the reality of that moment. Maria was dead. The honeymoon, meant to mark the beginning of their future, had ended in a violent silence. And with it, Khalid Al Mansoor crossed a line he could never return from. The morning after the fatal night, the Jumeirah resort followed its usual rhythm. Guests filled the dining halls for breakfast, staff polished the marble floors, and housekeeping began its routine rounds. But in Suite 509, the curtains were still drawn, the bed unmade, and silence hung in the air. Maria had not appeared for breakfast. Room service trays from the previous night were untouched. The staff grew uneasy, not because a guest overslept, but because of the disturbances reported by neighbors only hours before. Several had called the reception, complaining of shouting late at night, a man's voice thundering in anger and a woman crying. The hotel manager, Fatima Al-Rashid, decided to investigate personally. Accompanied by 2 security staff, Fatima knocked firmly at the suite's door. No answer. She knocked again, louder, still nothing. At last, she used her master key, and as the door clicked open, a chill swept over her. Inside, the scene was eerie. The once beautiful suite now looked disordered, a chair overturned, a broken glass near the balcony, curtains half torn from their rail. And on the floor near the bed lay Maria, motionless. Fatima froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Call the police," she whispered to security, her voice shaking. "Now." Within minutes, Dubai police arrived. Detective Omar Rahman, a seasoned investigator, took charge. The scene was immediately sealed off. Officers photographed the room, marking evidence with numbered tags. Forensic specialists moved with precision, collecting samples, dusting for prints, examining every trace. Khalid was found sitting in the corner, dazed, his kandjura rumpled, his eyes vacant. When asked what happened, his words stumbled. She collapsed. She fainted. I tried to help." But the investigators noted the bruises on Maria's neck, the marks consistent with strangulation. Faint bruises on her arms told of a struggle. Detective Rahman examined Maria's phone, retrieved from the nightstand. Within minutes, the truth began to unfold. WhatsApp messages, dozens of them, exchanged between Maria and Miguel Santos, her former lover. The latest, received only hours before her death, read, "I'll always love you." The timeline was clear. Message right arrow, confrontation right arrow, violence. Forensics strengthened the case. The estimated time of death matched the period when neighbors heard shouting. No sign of forced entry suggested the killer was already inside. And Khalid's fingerprints covered not only the phone, but the very glass shards found near the balcony where the fight escalated. As the investigation deepened, Khalid's story shifted. First, he insisted Maria fainted. Later, he admitted to an argument but denied harming her. Finally, under pressure, he confessed to grabbing her in anger, though he insisted he never meant to kill her. His words did little to soften the evidence stacked against him. By afternoon, news began to spread. Though Dubai's media is tightly controlled, whispers of the honeymoon tragedy reached tabloids and expatriate circles within hours. Headlines blared, "Bride found dead in Dubai resort. Honeymoon turns fatal." Within days, international outlets would call it the 2017 Dubai honeymoon murder. For Maria's friends and colleagues, the news was devastating. She had left Manila with dreams of building a future, and now she was being returned in a coffin. For Khalid's family, it was shame of the highest order, their name dragged into a scandal that cut against everything they stood for. Detective Rahman prepared his case file meticulously. Photographs of the crime scene, medical examiners report confirming death by strangulation, digital records of Maria's messages, and testimony from hotel staff and neighbors. Piece by piece, the puzzle was assembled into a clear picture. It was not an accident. It was not fainting. It was murder born out of rage, jealousy, and pride. And with that, Khalid Al Mansoor was charged with the killing of his bride, less than a week after they had vowed to begin a life together. The trial of Khalid Al Mansoor began in the autumn of 2017, only a few months after Maria's death. In Dubai, high-profile cases move swiftly, especially when family honor and public reputation hang in the balance. The courtroom was filled with tension from the very first day, a mixture of solemnity, media scrutiny, and family rivalry. On one side sat Khalid, dressed in a crisp white khanjara, his face expressionless. To many, he looked composed, even dignified. But beneath the calm exterior, his fate rested entirely in the hands of the judges. Behind him, members of the Al Mansoor family filled the benches, their presence a display of loyalty and power. On the other side sat Maria's relatives. Her mother had flown from Manila, grief etched deeply across her face. Friends from the Filipino community in Dubai gathered in silent support. They were fewer in number, but their pain filled the courtroom with a weight that no wealth could outweigh. The prosecution laid out its case with precision. They presented the forensic evidence, the bruises on Maria's neck, consistent with strangulation, the medical examiner's report, which ruled out natural causes, the testimony from hotel staff and neighboring guests who heard the shouting. Then came the digital evidence, Maria's phone, the WhatsApp messages with Miguel, and the timestamps that aligned with the neighbors' reports of a violent argument. This was not an accident, the prosecutor declared, his voice firm. This was not fainting nor a tragic collapse. This was deliberate violence, rage turned lethal. The victim was silenced because she dared to have a past her husband could not accept. The defense countered with a very different narrative. Khalid's lawyers argued that the killing was not premeditated, but the result of overwhelming emotion. A crime of passion, they called it, an explosion of jealousy, fueled by betrayal that spiraled out of control. Khalid himself spoke, his words measured and carefully chosen. "I lost control," he admitted. "I loved her. When I saw those messages, I felt destroyed. I never wanted her to die. I only wanted her to tell me the truth." His defense painted him as a man pushed beyond reason, a groom humiliated on his honeymoon, unable to bear the thought of being shamed. They urged the judges to see it not as cold-blooded murder, but as a tragic moment of human weakness. But the prosecution pushed back. They argued that Khalid's pride and control had always been present, that his actions were not just a momentary lapse, but the culmination of an attitude that viewed Maria as property rather than partner. They reminded the court of Maria's pleas, her attempts to calm him, and the force required to end her life. The families clashed outside the courtroom as well. Maria's relatives demanded justice, insisting that no cultural excuse could justify her death. They carried framed photographs of her in her nursing uniform, reminding the world she was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a woman who had worked tirelessly for her family's future. Khalid's relatives, by contrast, sought leniency. They emphasized his otherwise clean record, his role as eldest son, his potential to contribute to society if given a second chance. They argued that shame had already punished him enough. But the judges were unmoved by appeals to reputation. In their verdict, they recognized Khalid's act as intentional and violent, not accidental. The panel declared him guilty of murder. His sentence: life imprisonment under UAE law with no possibility of release for at least 25 years. The decision sent shockwaves through both families. Maria's mother wept openly, clutching her daughter's photograph, whispering prayers for justice finally served. Khalid's relatives lowered their heads, their family name forever stained by scandal. The trial concluded, but the tragedy lingered. For Maria's family, justice was bittersweet. No sentence could return their daughter. For Khalid, the man who once walked proudly through Dubai's social circles, the rest of his life would be spent behind prison walls, haunted by the crime that destroyed both his honor and his freedom. The tragedy of Maria de la Cruz and Khalid Al Mansoor was not only the story of two individuals. It was also a reflection of deeper themes that resonate far beyond a single hotel suite in Dubai. Behind every piece of forensic evidence, every courtroom testimony, lay cultural tensions, technological triggers, and the timeless human struggle between love, control, and secrecy. At its core, this case was shaped by the collision of two worlds. Maria, a Filipino expatriate, brought with her a background rooted in Catholic family values, resilience, and sacrifice. She had grown up knowing that survival meant compromise, and that opportunities abroad were rare lifelines. For her, marrying Khalid represented stability, security, and a chance to elevate her family's circumstances. Khalid, on the other hand, embodied the weight of Emirati tradition. His identity was bound to his family's honor, to expectations of loyalty, obedience, and control within marriage. In his eyes, love was important, but respect and reputation were paramount. A wife's past was not simply her own. It reflected on her husband, and by extension on the entire family. When Maria's secret communications with Miguel surfaced, it was not only a personal betrayal to Khalid, but also a cultural humiliation. The clash between Maria's attempt to quietly maintain a thread of her past and Khalid's rigid expectation of loyalty created a fault line that eventually fractured with devastating consequences. Another theme underscored in this tragedy was the role of technology. In 2017, smartphones had already transformed the way people lived, loved, and lied. WhatsApp, with its encrypted messages and instant notifications, became both a lifeline and a weapon. For Maria, Miguel's messages were emotional comfort, a connection to a world she had left behind. For Khalid, those same messages were digital evidence of betrayal. A single notification, glowing innocently on a screen, became the spark that ignited uncontrollable rage. This case highlights how technology can act as both bridge and barrier. The device that allowed Maria to stay close to her family and friends abroad also held the very secrets that ended her life. In a society where surveillance, suspicion, and honor intersect, a phone was no longer just a tool. It was a witness, a weapon, and in many ways the silent judge of truth. Honor and secrecy ran like twin currents through this marriage. Khalid's sense of control was not merely about personal ego, it was about upholding an image. In his world, betrayal was not just emotional, it was existential. To be dishonored by one's wife was, in his view, worse than any insult from the outside. Maria, meanwhile, held her secrets tightly. She may have convinced herself that messages to an ex were harmless, but by hiding them, she built a fragile wall of deception. Both bride and groom lived under illusions, he of a loyal, flawless partner, she of a husband who would never discover the fragments of her past. When those illusions collapsed, the fallout was catastrophic. This raises a haunting question. How much secrecy can a marriage withstand before it collapses under its own weight? Finally, this tragedy reflects the fragility of marriages formed under cultural, emotional, and economic pressures. Khalid and Maria's union lasted only days before ending in death, a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving. What looked like a fairy tale wedding was, in reality, a fragile contract built on conflicting expectations. Love without trust, marriage without communication, and partnership without mutual respect cannot survive. When pride and fear take the place of honesty, the result is not unity but destruction. In the end, the 2017 Dubai honeymoon murder was more than a crime of passion. It was a cautionary tale of two lives caught between cultures, haunted by secrets, and destroyed by the very forces meant to bind them together.